And now, marine weather around Alaska.
Looking at tonight's weather, winter storm warnings, blizzard warnings out for much of the western interior, and if not that, then winter weather advisories. Snow and blowing snow moving eastward here into the central interior later tonight, and then mostly rain for the Alaska Peninsula westward along the Aleutians here, with pretty gusty, strong southwest winds even behind the front here, picking up even more with the trough swinging around that 972 millibar low that tomorrow moves northeastward, slowly weakens, approaches the southwest coast. This low weakens as it moves into the Brooks Range there, and a little bit of a wave here on Friday moves up to just south of the Kenai Peninsula. The low off the Yukon Delta coast tracks northeastward and weakens, so areas of snow or rain and snow mix, especially in the afternoon here, especially for the east side of the state, with some light snow trailing back to the Kuskokwim Bay area, snow showers for the Alaska Peninsula, eastern Aleutians, and this low bringing more rain or rain and snow to the North Gulf Coast with rain for the southeast coast. Coastal water forecast, north to north, or basically north winds, or from the northeast to northwest for the south coast, only at 10 knots. Inside channels, winds at 10 knots. Passage Canal, Clarence Strait from the north, and for Lynn Canal from the south. And for the north coast here, anywhere from west to southeast winds, 15 to 20 knots. And for Friday, Lynn Canal, south winds 25 knots, south at 20 here for Stevens Passage, and southwest winds at 15 for Clarence Strait. And for the central and south coast here, south winds 25 knots, east-southeast 30 knots from the north coast. And for Prince William Sound, southeast winds at 15 knots, with south winds 15 to 25 knots for the North Gulf Coast. For Kamishak Bay, Cook Inlet, south winds at 30 knots, south at 30 also for the Barren Islands. And for Friday, Cook Inlet, southwest winds 25 to 30 knots, west 30 knots for Kamishak Bay. And the Barren Islands, west winds 25 knots. That blows into the western North Gulf Coast. Eastern North Gulf Coast, south to southwest winds 20 to 25 knots. Small craft advisories for Prince William Sound for south winds at 25 knots and seas at 4 feet. Kodiak Island for Thursday, south winds 25 to 30 knots. And for the Alaska Peninsula, southwest winds 25 to 35 knots, southwest at 30 for Bristol Bay. For the Alaska Peninsula, west-northwest winds 25 to 30 knots for Friday, northwest at 30 for Bristol Bay here, westerlies 30 knots for Kodiak Island, seas around 10 feet. And for the Fox Islands, west-southwest winds 30 to 35 knots, west-southwest winds at 35 knots for the central Aleutians, and west winds 35 to 40 knots for the western Aleutians. And for Friday, much lighter winds in these areas, west-southwest at 15 to 20 knots there, Adak and Atka, west winds at 20 knots. Small craft advisories for the eastern Aleutians, west winds 25 knots, seas 9 to 17 feet. Southwest coast, gale warnings tomorrow for south to southwest winds at 35 knots. St. Lawrence Island, Norton Sound, gale warnings also, south winds 35 knots. Gale warnings for St. Matthew Island, west at 35 and southwest winds 45 knots with 24-foot seas for the Pribilofs. And then on Friday, northwest at 25 for St. Paul and St. George, west 25 for St. Matthew Island, southwest coast, northwest winds 25 knots, Yukon Delta, or for the St. Lawrence Island area, northwest at 30 knots and northwest at 30 knots for Norton Sound. For the central and eastern Arctic coast tomorrow, southeast winds 20 knots, western coast east at 20, Chukchi Sea, south to southeast winds 25 to 30 knots. For the Chukchi Sea on Friday, northwest winds 30 knots, western Arctic coast west at 25, and the central and most of the eastern Arctic coast as well, looking at west winds at 25 knots.